All right. So in this video, we're going to go over the brain. So first off, we can see kind of looking down the center of the brain, there's what we call the longitudinal fissure. So that's this line down here. It's deep. It's deeper than anything else. So you can see it separates into right and left hemispheres. So that's the longitudinal fissure. We're going to see another fissure later on in the back. And then each one of the bumps, so the upper part is called a gyrus, singular is gyrus, plural is gyri. And then the valleys, so the indentations between the gyri are called the sulcus, is singular, sulci is plural. So you'll see kind of anywhere it's an indentation or a little valley, then it's the sulcus. If it's the mountain part, it's the gyrus. So longitudinal fissure, gyrus, sulci, or sulcus. We're going to look at specific ones and areas of the brain coming up. So first off, you remember, if you're looking at the brain from the side, this is the cerebellum. Side. So cerebellum, that is going to be posterior. So we know this is the posterior section. This is anterior. Now, if you remember just from kind of the bones and remember all the names of it, that's going to be the corresponding lobes. So anterior portion, remember right here, is right here. So this is your frontal lobe. Then if we're coming up to the top of the head, that's this section right here. This is your parietal lobe. So remember parietal bones, parietal lobe. Then we go to the back of the skull. So back of the brain, back of the skull is the occipital bone. This is the occipital lobe. Obviously, there's two, just fall apart. So that's the occipital lobe. Then over here, the yellow, that is corresponding where your ears are. So remember where your ears were is the temporal lobe, temporal bone, temporal lobe. So we have anterior, posterior, because the cerebellum's posterior. This is the cerebellum. This is the cerebrum. And we have kind of the outer portion, kind of where it's colored would be the cerebral cortex. So the largest part of the gray matter of the cerebrum. So anterior, posterior, cerebellum, cerebrum, cerebral cortex, frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe, occipital lobe. There is another lobe that it's kind of hard to see, but it kind of shows a little bit. The inner portion is going to be the insula. It's kind of hard to see, and it's on the inside, but it's another lobe of the brain as well. So cerebellum, you can see there's a deeper groove. So if you look really closely, there's a deeper groove. So we know a groove is a sulcus. And we're on the lateral sides. So the longitudinal fissure is the medial, separating into hemispheres. So this is the lateral side. Lateral sulcus. It's pretty definitive, so you can see it's pretty deep and you can see kind of the sections. It does go kind of continue on. So this is the lateral sulcus. The next sulcus that's pretty definitive is this guy right here. So between the blue and the red is a pretty deep groove. So we know if it's a groove, it's a sulcus. And this is called the central sulcus. Now it goes across anyways, kind of all the way across. It's just hard for me to hold. So where my fingers are running, that's going to be again between the blue and the red is going to be the central sulcus. So then the central sulcus is always the same kind of name, but we change names of the gyrus. So remember the bumps are the gyrus, gyri, and there's two different names that we have for it. So it can either be based on location or it can be based on function. So we're going to name both. This red part, again, this is anterior and this is posterior. So we're looking at the central sulcus is right here. And we have anterior. So this red portion right here is before or pre the central sulcus. So this is called the pre-central gyrus because it's a bump. It's a mountain part, so it's a gyrus, and it's anterior or before the central sulcus. So it's structurally precentral. Now, same here. So this darker blue is behind or posterior to the central sulcus. It's a gyrus because it's a bump, it's out extension. So this is your post central gyrus, and this is your pre central gyrus, just kind of surrounding the central sulcus. Central sulcus goes all the way across. The other one, so this right here, and going between the cerebellum, which is this, and the cerebrum, we have an indentation as well. This is also where dural folds will be. So this is called your transverse, because remember, a transverse plane is horizontal. So this is your transverse cerebral fissure. Now, there's not a major separation here, so you can see kind of here where your tentorium cerebelli will be. So it's just going to be separation between the cerebrum and the cerebellum is your transverse cerebral fissure. You can just see it along here. So back to going where the central sulcus is. Again, anterior, posterior. So central sulcus is right here, pre-central gyrus, post-central gyrus. But we also have functional names for it. So now all these are going to be functional, meaning what happens here. Your pre-central gyrus is also called your primary motor cortex. So part of the cerebral cortex, which is kind of all of this, is the primary motor. So a movement is happening. Now, when you have, most often we're going to have primary places, and then we're going to have association areas or another area that has to do with the same thing. So primary motor is where nerves are coming out to tell muscles to contract. Now, in this area, that's anterior to the primary motor. So this area here is going to be called your premotor area. Still has to do with motor movements, but this isn't just muscles contracting. It's going to be kind of coordination and movement that way. Then we have same thing. So motor, primary motor is the red, and that's the precentral gyrus. So again, this is anterior, this is posterior. So this is the post central gyrus. The post central gyrus is also called the primary somatosensory area. This is going to be where sensation comes in, at least partly. So that's going to be sensation from kind of the outside world, not visceral sensation, but somatosensory is somatic, meaning the body. So that's going to be this area. Now you can see again, just like when we saw with the motor, where we have primary motor and then we have premotor, we have primary somatosensory, and then we have the somatosensory association area. So the senses come in, and then we kind of can determine what they mean here. So primary somatosensory, somatosensory association area. Same that we have in the occipital lobe. So kind of in the back part of the occipital lobe in the center. So you can see kind of both sides here. That's going to be actually where your vision is. So primary visual area is in this kind of central area. So it's right kind of extending here. That is where sight comes in. So actually your optic nerves come from your eyes, go back and go to the back of your brain, posterior part in your occipital lobe. So primary visual area is in the center part, and then your visual association area is surrounding it. So you actually can see, and then you kind of make sense of what you're seeing because your eyes actually see things weirdly where they need to actually flip images around so you see the way you see right now. Um, just seeing the images, so just seeing light, dark, and actually images, making sense of what you're seeing is in the visual association area. So primary visual area, visual association area is here. Um, so I need the other side. There we go. Um, So we have a couple more kind of things that are specific. So you can see kind of in this section here is going to be what we call um, motor speech area or Broca's area. So you can see kind of in this section here, this right here is going to be kind of making sound. So Broca's area or the motor speech. Either one, Broca, Broca, or motor speech is fine. Right there. Then kind of back here in this area, here, then we're going to get the posterior language area, or it's going to be called Wernicke's is the name. So either one is correct. So it's going to be Wernicke's or posterior language. That's making sense of language here. Otherwise, here, kind of associated right here in your temporal lobe is going to be your primary auditory area. So this kind of section here. And then we have our auditory association area. It's going to be right here. So primary auditory association area. So hearing sounds, main sense of what you're hearing. And then kind of at the edge of the primary somatosensory, kind of have deeper, it's actually in the insula, so you'd have to kind of go inside and kind of separate the parietal lobe and the temporal lobe and go inside. This is called your primary gustatory area. It's where sense of taste is. So it'd be kind of showing kind of in the inside as if you were separating. So primary auditory association area, posterior language, because cerebellum posterior language, and then Broca's or motor speech. And that could be Wernicke's motor speech, Broca's. Last kind of section, we have premotor in this area, and then we have prefrontal which is going to be kind of right in front, the frontal lobe. So it's going to be the prefrontal cortex of the cerebral cortex. It's going to be here. So that's all the sections of the cerebral cortex that you're going to need to know. So kind of know the general areas for this. And then looking at, why is it blurring? There we go. So looking at the inside, so you have the cerebral cortex, but now you're going to have inside structures. Let me there. So we're going to have a couple of inside structures that we're going to go over. Here, you see kind of the Nike swoosh, or it kind of looks like a manatee to me sometimes. That's called your corpus callosum. That's going to be areas that have connection between your two sides or your two hemispheres. So you can have corpus callosum here. Here, where it's kind of tan, so this section right here is your lateral ventricle. And we'll see the lateral ventricle in a different section too. So this is where CSF is made and flows through. So that's going to be your lateral ventricle. So corpus callosum, lateral ventricle, and then this is going to be the fornix. So kind of the base of the corpus callosum. Then we have this white bulge here. So this is going to be where kind of coming forward eyes would be. So right here is also called the optic chiasm. This is where your optic nerves actually cross. So coming from your right eye to goes actually to the left occipital lobe section, and your left eye goes to the right. So they switch, and this is where they cross. So kind of just posterior, imagine eyes here, optic chiasm is that right here. This section right here that kind of bulges out, you can kind of see the indentation right here. So you can see right here, that is your thalamus. And this brown dot in the middle is called either your interthalamic adhesion or your massa intermedia. It's going to be another connection between the two sides of the thalamus. So massa intermedia is surrounded by the thalamus. The other kind of, so we have thalamus. So now this is kind of diencephalon, so thalamus, massa intermedia. Here, in this section here, is your hypothalamus. It's below or inferior, so hypothalamus. Your hypothalamus has a direct connection to this pink, larger pink area. That is your pituitary gland, major endocrine gland, so major communication and hormones made here. It's directly connected to the hypothalamus by this little stalk. So you can see this stalk area. That's called your infundibulum. So infundibulum, hypothalamus, connected to the pituitary, is connected by the stalk, infundibulum. So optic chiasm, and this is the anterior, so now we're more posterior. Pituitary gland with your infundibulum, hypothalamus, thalamus, massa intermedia. Now we're back at this pink dot here. So closer to the cerebellum, which again is posterior. This is called your pineal gland. It's where melatonin's produced to help with sleep-wake cycles. Here, in this section here, are your colliculi. Now, it's hard to tell kind of the differentiation, but you can see there's a little indentation that's showing the difference between the superior and the inferior. So this is your superior colliculi right here, and this is your inferior colliculi. Both are the colliculi, it just depends on superior's up, inferior's down. So superior colliculi, inferior. Let me see. This right here, that's kind of been darkened just posterior to pituitary gland is the mammillary body. We have the cerebral peduncle here. We have the pons part, so we're down in the brainstem. So pons is the egg-shaped, the anterior part of the brainstem. Cerebral peduncle, pons, medulla oblongata. Now, it's not just the medulla, it's the medulla oblongata is this section here before you're getting towards the spinal cord here. So medulla oblongata, pons, cerebral peduncle. Now, continuing on, so we had the lateral ventricle. We can't see the third ventricle very well on this model. We'll see it on another one, which I'm gonna have to go grab. And then we see the fourth ventricle. So we have a lateral, we have a third and fourth. The fourth ventricle is right here, just anterior to the cerebellum, fourth ventricle. Connecting the third ventricle and the fourth is this river. This is your cerebral aqueduct right here. Cerebral aqueduct to fourth ventricle. So lateral, cerebral aqueduct, fourth ventricle. We'll see the third better on a different model. Looking at the cerebellum, you see the white matter in the center. So all these white lines that kind of look like a tree. That's called your arbor vitae. So all of it is the arbor vitae. It's the white matter in the cerebellum. It looks like it's like life, tree life is what it means, arbor vitae. Then the other part is all looking at the wrinkles of the cerebellum. So look at how all the wrinkles. Each one of the wrinkles, so in kind of this, in the cerebrum, it's a gyrus. In the cerebellum, it's a folia. We don't have names for them, but each of the wrinkles is folia. So we have arbor vitae is the white, and the folia are the wrinkle parts. Grab next one. Forgot this model. All right. So this is a model of all your ventricles as if they were filled in. So you can look at the top ones. Both, there's two of them. These are your lateral ventricles. So if you kind of look at the shape, it looks like the lateral ventricles that you see right here. So that's corresponding to this one right here. And there's two of them on one side. Then you have your third ventricle right here. So you can see there's a connection between the lateral ventricles and the third ventricle. These little connection here, these little connection pieces are your interventricular foramen. So that is going to be, again, this section right here, the connection between the lateral ventricles, there's two of them, and the third ventricle, interventricular foramen, lateral ventricle, third ventricle. Then we saw, kind of looking at this model again, we saw that this is the fourth ventricle right here, and this is the cerebral aqueduct. Same thing that we see on this guy. But this one, we can see the third ventricle over there. It's harder to see, kind of interspersed with the thalamus. So you have third ventricle. We have the cerebral aqueduct. And we have the fourth ventricle. Right. So fourth ventricle, cerebral aqueduct, third ventricle, lateral ventricle, interventricular foramen, right there. Let me... Now I kind of looked at this. Oh, just going through what you have on Canvas. So remember, there's three major dural folds. There's the separation between the two hemispheres, the left and right, and that's the falx cerebri. Then we have the separation between the cerebrum and the cerebellum, as if they were here, and that's the tentorium cerebelli. And then we have division between the two hemispheres, because there are two hemispheres of the cerebellum as well. And so that's the falx cerebelli. So there's two falx and one tentorium. So falx cerebri, separating the left and right cerebral hemispheres. Tentorium cerebelli, kind of the tent over the cerebellum you can think of. And then the falx cerebelli is separating the two hemispheres of this cerebellum. So looking at the cranial nerves, you'll have to know the names and the functions. If I ask you, I'll ask you based on this picture, not based on a model, but you will need to know both the functions and what they are, the names. For everything else of the brain, you need just to know what they are. So these are the cranial nerves: optic, or olfactory, optic, ocular, motor, trochlear, trigeminal, abducens, facial, vestibular, cochlear, glossopharyngeal, vagus, accessory, hypoglossal. So a way to remember them is a mnemonic device. And now this is one that I have found. You can make up your own. You can find a different one that may be more memorable to you, whatever works. And this is all in order. So it can help you remember and kind of organize all of the optic nerves or cranial nerves. So on occasion, our trusty truck acts funny, very good vehicle anyhow. Can be a way to remember each one. Again, there's one of the options. If you don't like it or you want to come up with your own, that's great. If you want to look up another one, perfect. Just that's kind of a good way to remember them. Now, this mnemonic device, some say merry money, but my brother says big brains matter more, is telling you at least kind of slightly what it does, each nerve. It's not telling you exact function, but at least you can tell whether olfactory is an S. So olfactory is sensory. It's your sense of smell. If it says M for this mnemonic device, it's motor. So it's movement. And B means both. There's a sensory section and there's a motor section. So it's actually both. Now I'm going to give you multiple functions, at least for some of these nerves, and you can pick one. So if I ask you the function of the trigeminal, which has both, then you can pick one of the options that I give you. So looking at this picture, again, I'm going to kind of look based on the picture. One starts here. This is anterior. Cerebellum's posterior. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and then 12 is up top. So we're going to go each one, but that's kind of how you number them. So at least if you remember numbers, you can remember the names. So number 1, cranial nerve, is olfactory. So it's these two up here. Olfactory again is sensory, and it's your sense of smell. So being able to smell things. Show you that. Number 2 is optic. That's this green guy right here. And this is showing you where it's crossing. So this would actually be the optic chiasm right here. So that's your optic. It is also sensory. These are connecting to your eyes, back of your eyes, for vision. So this is your sense sight. And it's going to go and cross and go to the occipital lobe in the primary visual. The sense of sight or vision. Number 3, which is this guy right here, is your ocular motor. Now it's in your name, so ocular is having to do with the eyes, motor is movement. So it's part of eye movement and it's motor. It's also pupil constriction and eye movement. Now, there's going to be multiple nerves that have to do with eye movement, so sometimes collecting them together. So remembering at least even ones that have to do with the eye, optic, ocular motor, trochlear, abducens are all going to have to do with the eye. And ocular motor, trochlear, and abducens are going to have to do with eye movement. And there's different eye muscles that they're going to connect to. You don't need to know that. Just know that it's helping moving the eye. The ocular motor is also for pupil constriction as well. Showing pupil constriction. So if you need changes in light, smooth muscle is going to contract, so you can change the size of your pupil. Again, trochlear, that's going to be this guy right here. Here. This is also motor, and I already mentioned that it's going to be part of eye movement as well. So olfactory, optic, ocular motor, and then trochlear. So 2, 3, and 4 have to do with the eyes. We skip 5 and we go 6 and we go back to the eyes as well. Trigeminal is this big, large one here. It is going to be both motor and sensory. So I'm going to give you two kind of functions. It is sensation to the face. So actually being able to feel your face is going to be your trigeminal. So a lot of people get confused. Don't get confused with a facial nerve. That's going to be actually movement to the face. The trigeminal is being able to feel. But also the muscles of mastication. So remember your chewing muscles, the muscles that help you open and close your jaw. So muscles of mastication, like your masseter muscle, is going to be the trigeminal. So sensation part is to the face, and then the motor part is moving those muscles of mastication. Now we go back to the eye. So the abducens is number 6. That is this guy right here, and that's motor, and we're back to eye movement. So like I said, we have optic, ocular motor, trochlear, and abducens all have to do with eye movement. Now, 7 is the facial nerve. So again, there's going to be similar. Don't get confused that it's not sensation in the face. That's trigeminal. It's going to be this guy right here. So this green one right here. It is both sensory and motor. The sensation part is actually to the anterior part of your tongue. So the front part of your tongue is being able to feel that. If you bite your tongue, and the front part is going to be your facial nerve. The motor part is actually muscles of facial expression. So those muscles that we talked about for smiling are going to be innervated by the facial nerve. So smiling is the facial, sensation is trigeminal, muscles of mastication, so chewing is the trigeminal, smiling, facial, feeling the anterior portion of your tongue is facial. So smiling. Number 8 is this pink guy right here, and that is your vestibular cochlear. So vestibular is going to be balance, and cochlea is part of your inner ear. So this is the sensory nerve, and it's hearing and balance. So it's being able to keep your balance is part of your inner ear, and hearing. So going to the primary auditory section of your temporal lobe is going to be the vestibular cochlear. Number 9, so this next one right here is your glossopharyngeal. Now, when you hear glosso, that means tongue because we have a hypoglossal, also tongue. And pharyngeal, the pharynx is a fancy name for your throat. So you can imagine this is going to have to deal with your tongue and your throat. Glossopharyngeal, it is both. Now, we had sensation from the facial nerve to our anterior tongue. Now we need sensation to our posterior tongue. You need to feel all of your tongue. And that's going to be this guy. Posterior tongue. That's the glossal part. Sensation to your posterior tongue. The pharyngeal part and the motor part is it's part of swallowing. So being able to swallow is the pharyngeal part of your glossopharyngeal. And we'll see swallowing again as well. Number 10 is vagus. No, not the city. It's going to be a major nerve that we'll talk about with the parasympathetic nervous system. We'll go to the autonomic. So that is this one right here, vagus. It is both as well. And sensation to a lot of the visceral organs. So the inside is going to be the vagus nerve, visceral organ sensation, and also swallowing and speech. So we saw swallowing with the glossopharyngeal. Swallowing and speech has to do with the vagus as well. So it's a very large nerve and it has kind of a lot of places that it's at. So sensation to visceral organs, swallowing and speech is the motor part. That's just showing you a speech. Next is this blue guy right here that has kind of all the branches. That's the accessory. This is going to be a motor, and it's going to be motor to your shoulder and neck muscles. Again, you don't need to know specific ones, but it's going to help with shoulder and neck muscles, so movement. Last is the hypoglossal. Number 12 is this one right here. So remember, it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So it kind of goes backwards. 12, hypoglossal. That is right there. It is a motor. And again, when we have glossal, we're talking about tongue. So we talked about sensations of the tongue, both with the facial and the glossopharyngeal. Now this is movement of the tongue. So tongue movement, that's the motor part. All of the cranial nerves. So again, remember both functions and names of the cranial nerves. If you have any questions, let me know. I hope this video helped you. Um, and I will see you next class.